see everyone here today. Everybody doing all right? Y'all got quiet all of a sudden. We'll change that up a little bit. Y'all look like you want to learn something today. Either that or you're just kind of sleeping with your eyes open. I can't figure out which the difference is. Hey, we've been kind of moving right along in this whole process. And it's a process that's going to take us a whole year to do, okay? So you have to be very patient. You have to be good students. You have to keep up in class. If you forget where you are in class, the good news is you can go to the website and you can click a little button that talks about all the things that you've missed, okay? And so we're going to be moving along at kind of a pretty good pace here. And what we're dealing with on this day, which we start off a new one, is kind of recognizing, kind of set up the whole deal. It's kind of recognizing this guy named Jesus. Surely you've heard of him by now, right? Y'all thinking about it? No, him, okay? Jesus created this whole culture. Everywhere he went, there's just this atmosphere that he presented to people, right? Every place he went, there were people, there were crowds. And the reason in my mind that all of a sudden these people showed up is because Jesus, I think, just really had this ability to make people feel safe around him. Think about what that feeling is like. I think they began to understand that they were valued as human beings, regardless of who they were or what society thought they were or said they were, regardless of their past and all of their issues that, gosh, they keep coming up every single day, don't they? But I think they felt around him that they were valuable human beings, in spite of their status in life. I think in Jesus' presence, they suddenly became significant, very aware that they are an actual big part of God's purpose in the world. They just weren't floating around being zombies or doing things in this life, that they were valued. They meant something to him. And so I think he had a way of instilling hope in people's lives. My life isn't being wasted. I'm something that I can do. I am somebody in the eyes of God. So if you wonder why there were so many crowds that seemed to follow Jesus everywhere he went, I don't think you have to go any further than seeing the atmosphere that he created like this. You know, when you start looking at Jesus and you see the crowds that are around him, you know the word crowd or crowds is spoken of 147 times in the Gospels that describe the situation of the people that round Jesus all the time. That's a lot of crowds. That's a lot of activity. That is a lot of people that they followed him. Not he to go to church and they came to him. No. He went out and they found him. They sought him. They discovered him because they knew who he was and what he represented, and that was what people eagerly wanted. And so what the crowds found to be true about Jesus is the very same thing we are supposed to find to be true about this Jesus that cannot keep us being still, that cannot keep us away from being in that presence. And if we truly do feel the same way that the crowds in the gospel stories reveal, you know, it is a part of our responsibility then to create that very same atmosphere that Jesus created everywhere he went in this place. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine doing that? And that's kind of our whole mission this year that we are really, really trying to do. We're trying to move in that direction of creating this culture, this Jesus culture, this culture that Jesus created, this atmosphere on our campus, in this place of worship, wherever we might be as a people, is to have this feeling of hope in people's lives everywhere we go. And so we keep moving this church into the place where people do feel safe, regardless of who they are or what they've done, where they become so subtly aware of their significance and God's purpose in this life, where we come here so we can achieve and the feeling of people feeling hope for their lives. We're trying hard to create this atmosphere in everything that we do. So, first of all, I have to say this out there, that this atmosphere just doesn't happen on its own, right? It doesn't. It just doesn't come when you say, well, I'm just going to go to church today. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen when we say, I want to be a member of the church. That doesn't happen either. It happens when people of God become so intentional with who they are and what they do. It happens because there's this intentional act of the followers of Jesus who commit to being a part of the process that God designed for our lives. And this process begins when we do three things and do three things well. So if you're wondering, well, what am I supposed to do as a person in the life of the church? Three things. That's it. Just three things. First thing you got to do is you have to worship consistently. And I don't care if it's 8:30, 11 o'clock, or if it's 8:30 and 11 o'clock. It doesn't matter to me. Two completely different worship services. But when we come in and we come to worship, we're here to open up our lives to God. We're here to hear what it is that God is going to do through us and for us next. We've come to worship and give praise to God. We don't come in here to get a list of things that we expect to happen in worship, right? Because that means we're worshiping ourselves. We've come to turn all of our focus on God. And we need to do this consistently with our lives because we need to have that reminder of who we are every Sunday, every time we gather. And the second thing we need to do is we really need to learn how to understand these scriptures. That's a real confusing thing. I've talked to a friend the other day. He says, well, I just don't get it. And she was throwing something at me in the book of Samuel's. I said, well, I don't get it. Well, why are we doing that? Focus on the simple things, like the teachings of Jesus, because they're really not that simple. But if you really want to understand the core of who God is, the main source for God is this Jesus, because he is the closest thing to God that we'll ever be able to recognize. So let's focus on that. And let's get a really good foundation going. Let's grasp an understanding of who this God is through this person of Jesus. And we need to involve ourselves in these small groups with someone who is guided to do just that, to help us through this process. So when we pick up the Bible, we're not intimidated by it or have these false things being thought about what that book is all about. And it differs from group to group, doesn't it? Some Bibles are a little bit harder upside the head than others. You know what I'm saying? Right. So we need to grasp an understanding. And the third thing that we need to do, and do it together, is that we really need to discover what your ministry is. And I want us to really make the transition in our minds that you are ministers. You ever thought about yourself that way? You're not just people who come and sit and grasp a few things and see if you can get out of here in time to beat the Presbyterians for lunch. There's more to it than that. More to it than that. We are children of God. We have a special place in God's kingdom. We have a special purpose for our lives, and our responsibility is to figure out what it is, because when we find that, and we find the gifts that we're using, and we use it with the passion that we have, according to the time that we have to offer, then we're going to begin to see things and experience things that we never really thought existed. And then like we experienced with Pam Walker last week, that aha moment will come on. And then you say, this is why I was created. And there's not a more important place to be in life when you've discovered who God made you to be. Three things. That's it. Three things. Because we do those three things, then magic happens. Okay? Secondly, In addition to those three things, we also have these discovery classes. Have you heard those yet? They are great classes, folks, I'm telling you. I've never been more excited about teaching classes than these 4 discovery classes that we do every single month. Because these discovery classes are designed to help you understand Jesus' mission in the world through our church. It's also helpful to help you understand how God is using you in your ministry. It's not to try to pigeonhole you to do something you don't want to do in the church and volunteer, and we'll check on you 45 years from now to see if you still have a pulse. That doesn't exist. It's to help you understand how God designed you to touch and to serve those who Jesus came to touch and to serve. Very powerful classes. And everyone who wants to be a part of this church goes through those 4 classes. Does that make sense? Can't say it enough. Thirdly, that reaches us to the place where we are today in worship. Does that make sense? Because in our worship that we're dealing with this year, in order to be able for us to create this atmosphere that Jesus created with his life, we're going to have to learn how to love and to do the things that Jesus did. We have to learn how to love the way that Jesus loved. And a lot of the ways that he loved, man, it's not easy, folks. It's tough. If it was easy, you know what happened? Everybody would do it, right? The church would not be declining a lot of leaps and bounds. We struggle with this atmosphere we're trying to create. Churches are. 10,000 churches a year but dying every year. Why is that? It's not because it's bad preaching. Well, that went over like a lead balloon, didn't it? In spite of what you say, because that atmosphere is gone, right? We've been in churches, folks, where the tension's so strong you can cut it with a knife. You're looking over your shoulder to see who's whispering behind your back. It's anything but love that's invited there, isn't there? And to be able to move beyond those issues, we're going to have to take charge of our lives, be responsible with our lives, and commit to living a different life and learning how to love the way that Jesus loved. If we can just figure this thing out, you know what we're going to do? We'll do amazing things. Because that is the atmosphere that people crave, absolutely crave with their lives. So, we've been dealing with all these different topics so far. We're dealing with 7 different topics about the different kinds of love that Jesus challenges us to love with, okay? The first one we dealt with the first month has to do with love. Jesus' love reaches out and brings in the lost. That's a kind of a tough one, okay? Because it makes us take the focus off of me and mine and my little family and my little church members and puts our focus on the people who are lost, who just can't seem to know what to do or what direction to go to. And the problem with Jesus is that he sets the standard a little bit high for his followers. He set it high when he said these words, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to do what? Serve." So our first human reaction is what? He's going to serve me, right? And so it's this knee-jerk reaction. I have to take care of myself. We crave that in this country. But it's not to imply at all that taking care of ourselves or those close to us is not important. There's a different formula that Jesus uses. Because what Jesus is saying with that statement that he puts upon us as his followers is this, that when we serve those who Jesus served, then our needs begin to diminish. You know? I don't know the math on that one. I'm not that smart. I can do 7s and 3s and 40s. That's all they teach us in seminary, right? But somehow it works. Somehow it works. When we take care of those who Jesus takes care of, our needs diminish. Try it. I'm not a mathematician. And then the second month, I guess, we talked about how love puts God before all things, which is a tough thing to do, but also puts others before ourselves, which is kind of similar to the first one, but it's a little bit different, right? Because the church is about listening and responding to God who leads us, to people that God needs us to serve. And if we're stuck doing things that we've always done the same way for the last 40, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 years, then we're not even going to be able to hear what God is trying to say to do new things in the world. And so it is a very difficult thing to do, is to listen to God and then react where God sends us to people who need us the most. Because it's that math thing again. I don't know how it works, but when we take care of other people who God wants us to take care of, our needs somehow are met. Try it. And so now we start a whole different series we're going to talk about this month, another love, an emotional thing. You ready for this one? God's love prays for our enemies and seeks no revenge. Except when you drive. There's an asterisk to that one, of course. I doubt Jesus got ran off the road by an extra camel or something down hitting 4 miles an hour. Yes, even when we drive. Think about that. Pray for your enemies and seek no revenge. That's tough. It's tough because it's something we tend to ignore as people of God, and I say we, implying that there's a me and we as well, because it creates our anger. There's this deep-seated, hurtful feeling that we have towards others for whatever reason, and the more we let it go or ignore it, the deeper it gets, and the worse our actions and behavior starts to get. And the next thing we know, we're just grumpy people, and we're not going to create an atmosphere like that, are we? Well, we will, but not the one people want to go to. We've got enough of that in this world, right? In fact, this pain that we have sometimes when we get so angry is so incredibly deep that our feelings are so incredibly strong that we think these feelings are stronger than God's ability to heal us. And there is absolutely no way whatsoever that I will be able to move forward because it's so strong, and I will never be healed from this. And there is not another day that I'll have that will be exciting with that person or this situation again. The crazy thing about this Jesus that we worship is that Jesus says that's not even true. That's not even close to being true. He doesn't believe that at all. In fact, the most important critical writing that we have of Jesus is the Sermon on the Mount, the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapter in the Gospel of Matthew. It is his thesis for his life. If you read nothing but those 3 chapters in your life, you're going to know more about who God is than people who read the Bible their entire lives, from cover to cover. If you really want to grasp who this God is, you read that story. You read the Sermon on the Mount, and you'll get a really good understanding of what God is about and what matters most to God. And so in the heart and soul of this text, of this sermon, Jesus begins to reveal that reconciliation, making things right with each other, is one of the most critical pieces in our relationship with God and our brothers and sisters in this world, period. So Jesus set a standard for the way that God's people love. And it's not easy, folks. It's the most challenging thing you'll ever do. And this is what he says in his sermon. You have heard it said to those in ancient times that you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. Then he stops, right? Because he's with a well-educated audience at this point, right? They know the law. They know, oh, that's the 6th commandment, right? Do not murder. I don't do that. I'm a good boy. right? But he takes a step further. He starts to meddle in people's personal lives. But I say to you, if you're angry with your brother or sister, you'll be liable to judgment. If you insult your brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. You don't want to go to the council. If you say, you fool, which is the four-letter word of the Bible, you will be liable to the hell of fire. Simple question. Raise your hand. I won't look. Raise your hand if you have not broken any of those three in the last 5 minutes. Okay? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, 5 minutes, yeah. While you're drinking coffee and you couldn't say anything. Right? Okay. That's a good 30%. Well, okay, 20%. Okay, so what's up with this? Has anybody been angry with their people? With their neighbor? Even while they're driving? So what is Jesus saying here? Liable to judgment? Let's slow down a little bit, okay? Let's slow down. We all have been there. And not just once. Maybe once a week at the most, at the least. At the least. I think it's safe. I think that's safe. At the least. We all have. I certainly have. Some of you have felt that a few times, haven't you? And hopefully as we get older, maybe a little bit wiser, we don't be as angry as much as we used to be, right? But we are a people who find it so easy in our world today to be controlled by our emotions, to be controlled by our feelings to the point that it gets us in trouble. Anybody been there? Today. So, if we just settle in this mindset, well, that's just the way I am. I ain't never going to change. You just got to deal with who I am. We've already given up on God, haven't we? We're already denying God's ability to enter into the depths of our soul and to change us into a new creation. You want an example? All right, who are we going to pick on today? My kids aren't here. We'll pick on my kid's dad. That's what we'll do. We'll pick on him a little bit. This is their payback. If you talk to my children, they will tell you that I was a horrible father. They will tell you that my issues of anger, of rage, of abuse reached the point when they were little that their mother did the best thing to me she can possibly say. Get it together or find somewhere else to live. How many of you knew that? Besides my children. So, I could have said, you know what? That's just the way I am. Right? The way my dad did, he threw me against the wall, buried his fist in my belly all the time. What's the big deal about that? That's how you're supposed to raise children. That's how I was raised. Nothing wrong with that, is there? Of course there is. Right? At that time, we had a guy in the church named Byron Lehman who passed away, and I miss him completely. And he was a counselor, but he was also a minister. And man, what a great guy he was. He was a big dude, right? And so he wasn't intimidated by me at all. In fact, it was just the other way around. And he had a deep, deep voice. In fact, we let him play the role of God in some of the speaking engagements. People go, ooh, wait, hey, 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 right? And so he really had a way of speaking to us. But he was the kind of person that would tell me the way it was. He would not let me off the hook. He would look me in the eye, and he would use the words that you use in bowling alleys, right? But he knew how to talk to me, and he knew how to get to me. And so he taught me so much about myself. He taught me so much how to deal with things that I didn't know you weren't supposed to do. And the one thing that stuck to my mind to this day that I used it incredibly a bunch of times is that, I don't know if you've heard this before. It's called what? Have you seen this? Feel, act, think versus feel, think, act. Anybody hear that before? Well, you're getting a $40 therapy session for free here today, okay? How I responded was this, and this is kind of sometimes is a man thing. We feel something that pushes our buttons, and we still feel that rage a little bit, right? We start to get going, and then what do? We act. And then what happens after we act? Oh, darn it. I shouldn't have done that. Then you got to sit down and think of another way to deal with the mess that you just made, right? Man, my dad was so good at that. And I could tell you the days that he would do that. He would get so mad at me, he would nail me, and then send me in my room, and I'd sit up there, and I'd wait 15 minutes, and then he'd come up, and then he'd talk to me. That's how you do punishment in my home, right? But I do remember the day that he never came up to my room. And it was the worst feeling in the world. So Byron tells me, you know what? You get yourself out of a whole lot of trouble is if when you begin to feel something that's starting to make you angry or rage, if you would just stop and identify that feeling and what that feeling might be and why you have it, and think about what you're going to do with that feeling or how you're going to react in response to that other person when you have that feeling. And so you're already putting a strategy together when you start to feel something. So now you're starting to feel something, and then you either take a time out or whatever you do, but you got to stop and you got to think about it, and then you do what? You act. Like a human being, you act. And that was like, what? You can actually do that? It changed everything about my life. It was something as simple as that. Can God change people's lives? You bet they can. And believe me, that's not the only thing I've had to change in my life was figuring this thing out. But it was a good start. And I saw him every week for, I bet, 3 or 4 years until he died. It stopped becoming a counseling session, started becoming coaching. All right, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? And he always asked me, how's it going? I said, well, so-and-so's kind of messed up, but I'm doing good. And that's when he get mad at me. And I always like to make him mad because he's a big guy and he gets mad easy. So I'd have to tell him, all right, you're feeling something, now start to think about it before you act, okay? So anyway, we trade that off a little bit. But here's what Jesus is telling his followers. Our control cannot be given to our feelings at the moment. We have to be able to learn how to give our control over to God in all things. We have to be controlled by the grace of God instead of these raging emotions that are out of control. Because this is the most critical to God's people, that Jesus insists that the best time that we need to resolve any conflict we might have with somebody is when? You know the answer. When's the best time to resolve conflict? Now. Not at the right time. Now. Swallow your pride. Handle your business now. Before you give yourself permission to ignore it. And before that feeling begins to lead to something even more abusive. And you begin to let your life be defined as one who says, well, that's just me. I can't change anyway. It is so incredibly critical to our faith that Jesus even commands that we take care of our business. before we take our place at the table, because this table identifies us as one who is committed to following this Jesus, who is teaching us to do something different. So how dare we come up to here when we're choosing not to do the things that he's asking us to do? So he even says that. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, and all of a sudden remember that you have something against your brother or sister is against you, there's something that's not right. Leave your gift. And go and be reconciled again. And then come back, because you know what's going to happen there? All of a sudden, it's just not a place you put your gift. It's a table of celebration. Because there's nothing better than newfound respect. Nothing better than a reconciled relationship that has been broken. It's worth dancing about. Jesus is kind of smart. Man, that's tough, isn't it? So when we talk about this altar, when we talk about this table, there's actually two things that's going on up here that we're going to be participating in. The first thing that is, it's an act of grace, right? This is represented by a guy that we killed, and he's offering it to us, and that doesn't make sense. I don't do the math on that one either, but somehow it works. But it's an act of grace where Christ calls us to be able to experience a safe place, regardless of our past, regardless of who we are. It's safe. And it's a place that we become suddenly aware that we are a major part of God's purpose in the world. And our life has meaning. There's hope for all of us. And so we come to this table so that we can experience this. But you know what? It doesn't stop here, because not all of us can fit on top of the table. We'll try if you want. I'll watch. We'll put it on video. Whatever you want to do. But this table is also a table of empowerment, people. Because God calls us into action when we come here. It's kind of like a boomerang or a big rubber band. We come in here and God sings us out into the world, right? Because why? Because God loves us so much that God realizes that life is far more meaningful. Life is far more fulfilling. Life is far more powerful when we share what God has entrusted with us, with those who have nothing. So, yeah, this table, it tells us that we have to be willing to do the hard things. And the hard things we have to be willing to do is to address our brokenness and allow God to heal us before we can move out into the world and become healers for God. We cannot do one without the other. You can't say I'm an ambassador for God when you got too much garbage that you can't deal with. You cannot deal with other people's garbage. Sorry. So the church here, then, is just a group of people. We're broken. We're flawed. We are. But we have chosen to do the hard things in life, like allowing ourselves to be healed by a merciful God, so that we can seek a world of broken people and share the secret of wholeness in the life of Christ that we have found. Powerful. Very powerful. So when we come to this table, I hope that you feel the love and grace and beauty of God. When you come to this table, I hope you feel empowered that God is calling you to do some very amazing things with your life through his ministry. And it's up to you to find that place. I can't force you. No one can. That's your choice. But we can get you there. But we can't make you drink the water. I want you to be here to experience this love of a man whom we killed, reaching out and giving you life. Do the math on that one. It doesn't work, does it? But that's the kind of God we have. If that's the kind of God we have, should we be more like the crowd who just can't wait to be in the presence of Jesus? Let us pray. Your patience with us, oh God, is astounding. But there's nothing greater than your grace. No matter what we have done, no matter what we continue to do, or what we will do, that never changes. Help us to understand and grasp the power of your love and mercy, that we can find ourselves sitting at your table, embracing what you have given us, but more importantly, allowing us to believe you more than the thoughts in our head that says what we cannot be. Allow us to understand that you created us for a vision, you created us for purpose. That when we gather with our brothers and sisters in this room, that we become closer to you in our understanding of who you need us to be. So help us, we pray. And as we gather together to participate in your body and your blood, to take those into our own very lives, will you heal us of our brokenness, that we may in turn serve those that you would call them to serve. That all of us can gather together once again the following week around this table to celebrate what you have done in this world and our great part to make it happen. Guide us as we partake. Strengthen us and empower us to be your people. And give us the ability, as you always do, to do the hard things in this life that need to be done in your name.